Hello and welcome to Tuesdays Morrissey. I'm Adam Morrissey. Today I'm thrilled to be joined by Representative Carl Sherman. Representative Sherman is a member of the Texas House of Representatives and a candidate for U.S. Senate. Carl, congrats on the recent Senate announcement and thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, thank you, Adam Morrissey. Thank you for the work that you do to communicate the things that are relevant to our times. And I found that some of the individuals who have been influenced by you have been really people whose lives have been changed. The trajectory of their lives have been changed. And since the first time I met you in my district office with a young man, that made an impression on me. So thank you. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak to your audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking about that today, actually. That isn't the first time we met, but you have played a role in two of the things I'm most proud of. Like when I think about the coolest things I've ever done, and I'm not saying like cool, like winning a sporting event or something, but real like sense of pride is you were a guest on a previous podcast, and we did an episode as part of a 4-part mini-series on equitable cities.
Oh, yeah.
Was about and that was like a really cool, especially like it was 2020. There was a lot of things going on politically, and we were really digging in to what contributed to some of the inequalities in cities. So that was something I was really proud of. And then, of course, the interaction with my little brother from Big Brothers Big Sisters, and just witnessing you and the way you poured into him. I think it's something everyone should get a chance to see. So I appreciate you sharing more of yourself with us.
Thank you, Adam. And you know, who would imagine that in the year of our Lord 2024, we would still be discussing these issues as though they were a privilege and not a right of humanity.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, excited to have a conversation about leadership, and especially the concept of leading with humanity at the center. It's something you've had a chance to demonstrate in several different aspects of your life and in several different phases. But before we get into that, I'm curious, what's been the most interesting part of launching the Senate campaign?
You know, the excitement of going across the state, meeting different people, and then understanding that most people are not aware of the influence that a U.S. Senator can have on changing their life for the better. I mean, most people don't know that a U.S. Senator can influence whether they have quality health care or not. They're just not aware of these things and the overwhelming power that one of two senators has that represents your state and 30 million Texans, quite frankly. They're not aware that, even the issues at the border, that your U.S. Senator can, if they have the desire and they're willing to address the issue, they can come up with policy that comports to humanity and the economic interest of our number one trading partner, by the way, is Mexico. So this is not or should not be an adversary relationship. Really, if we have folks that are representing you and they're just not aware that a U.S. Senator has that much influence. And since 1970 or before, we've not had, whether Democrat or Republican, serious, comprehensive immigration policy to address this issue. It's unfortunate that people want to use this as a political issue to drum up their base. And that's unfortunate.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. I think there's a lot that people, living in cities don't really fully understand what goes on in state houses and at Congress at the national level. How has working in the legislative branch changed the way you look at the world and kind of the role of government?
To see the number of special interests that are engaged and involved in the legislative process really changes your outlook of governance. There was a movie that came out. Gosh, it seems like almost a century ago. Mr. Smith goes to Washington, and this movie is about this honest man who had no political connections, and he just had a desire to serve his community, to be able to champion the issues and concerns for them. And he was supported by the Boy Scouts of America, and he went there only to discover that there is no rhyme or reason to the legislative process. Reasonable argument, rational argument doesn't always win. And so that in itself has affected my outlook. At the same time, I know and have been encouraged by timing and support of the right people and the right things happening. That will cause an issue to come to the forefront. And, with that American ingenuity, persistence, we can get effective change. But, you have to realize that politics in many ways is a process of amelioration, similar to football being a game of inches, right? And it's not every time, but sometimes if you have that stick to itness, you will get a Hail Mary, and we will see game changing legislation that allows for more systemic structural changes. And so that's what keeps me going, is that given the right time, the right people, and the right circumstances, we can move legislation. But you got to be determined, and you got to listen to the people. The best laws are laws that originate from issues of everyday people. And that's what I love about this, because I don't like politics, Adam. In fact, like is not strong enough of a word. I don't like. I despise. But I love the Lord. I love people, and I love policy. I love shaping policy that comports to humanity, that addresses the issues of people who are not allowed into the room, much less a seat at the table. And so that, to me, is what drives me to show up every day and fight for the average person.
You bring up a really interesting point about, I think it's most clear in political environments. Like, everyone realizes there's outside influences at play, but it's really at play everywhere. In the education system, in business, even as I've rose like from my level, and I've grown like more engaged in the marketplace with other business leaders, you can see how influences play a role. What do you think we can learn, whether we're operating in a political environment or not, about leading in environments where there are so many outside influences?
This to me is so critical in advancing good legislation, and this is good for leadership to be relevant. It is the best ideas come out of having all of the influence brokers at the table simultaneously. Now, so often people want to make sure they've got the basis and the framework of their ideas first, or their initiatives. But really, I've found that it is most productive to have everyone there, because at the end of the day, none of us is as smart as all of us. So if you have every party that is affected by these decisions, then it's best to do that. And we have to, as a democracy, get to the point where we are welcoming everyone. You mentioned earlier how we first met each other talking about the inequities and making sure that everyone has equity in whether it's home ownership or whatever the issue is. Well, you don't get to that point until you, as a leader, are open to ideas from everyone, and that, it's something that we have to be disciplined about, because you get in these leadership roles and it's easy to think that you're the leader. Ideas should be coming from top to bottom, as opposed to this being participatory for everyone involved, because everybody will be influenced by this. Look, there's a true story about a hotel in San Diego, California, years ago, like 1900, that the hotel owner, it was so many stories high, and they were really having trouble going from the first floor up, and because it's only stairs. And they were having a meeting with the engineer, the architect, the owner of the building, the general manager of the hotel, and they were discussing how and the plan they were going to do this, and how long they would have to be closed. And there was a janitor who was listening, a custodian who overheard them, and he said, if I could say something, and they allowed him to speak, and he said, this won't affect my job, because there'll constantly be work I've got to clean up because of all the construction and everything. But you're going to put a lot of people out of work when you do this. He says, now, have you ever thought about just putting the elevators on the outside of the building? And that's where we got our first elevators, on the exterior of the building, and glass where they could see out. So, came from the guy who was the maintenance guy. And that's what I believe we fail to do. And we've got to be really concerned about this, especially with the authoritarian trend that's happening across the globe. And it's certainly one of the reasons that we have so many people trying to get into this country from the southern border, coming from thousands of miles away from Mexico to get in our nation. And so that, to me, is sort of an antidote to protect our democracy, is that everyone be a part of those decisions.
Yeah, you make me think of a couple things. I spent some time as a management consultant, like in my 20s, and people were always like, who are you consulting when you're so young? But the reality is, oftentimes, it's not that the consultants have the best ideas, but they have good processes that they can get the information out of their clients and then give it back to them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and think about it. That's what a psychologist does. That's what, a counselor does. They listen to you and help you see your thoughts, and then you can break it down. And you're exactly right. I love that.
Yeah, I was thinking too, when you were sharing, both about operating with environments and influences, and just things that cause a lot of problems. I think it's the lens we view the world. I think one of the biggest things is our wrestling with identity. And we so badly want to attach ourselves to anything, really, a sports team, a political party, you name it. But I found what simplifies a lot of things is looking at things through the lens of humanity.
Yeah. Wow.
It makes things tremendously more simple.
It does.
Maybe not any easier, but at least simpler.
Yeah, it does. And so often, we have difficulty really getting a accurate sense of our self-efficacy, of our effectiveness to address some issues, because we think that our views, as you say, it's determined by how you look at life, your perspective, the prism in which you look at life. So often we think our views are translucent. We believe that it is the way we see it. And we are sadly mistaken, because all of our views are skewed in some way. And so it is really a crippling effect when we don't consider other views, when we are so uh, insistent on making sure that someone else's perspective is minimized, where while mine is amplified. And that's where you have these attacks on DEI. They feel that there's a threat on just the fact of, hey, you know what, we're going to build this into our process. As you talked about, our process is going to say we're going to counter our own biases by saying, I know we've always envisioned only men should have consideration for these positions, but we know that we're imperfect in our ability to see beyond the exterior. Even God says, man looks at the exterior, but God looks at the heart of a man. So we seem to think that we have X-ray vision.
Yeah, we do. And it's interesting when you're talking about, aggregation of power, it's like, it can become a real nasty cycle as you assume more power and there wouldn't be a janitor to speak up after a while.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Why?
Why?
Yeah, why should he speak up, right?
Yeah, if he's learned the behavior that his input's not going to be valued, people can lose that drive to speak up, which is really what we're talking about here. Is how important it is for people to speak up.
Absolutely, because it advances humanity, and it's one of the reasons I'm running for the U.S. Senate. Just one, but is to bring humanity and sanity to governance and humility and civility to politics. You look at, even we're watching the NFL right now, right? And they're now down to 8 teams in the playoffs. And I was watching this as a guy born in this package in America. I realized, wow, we have had, when I was a kid, there weren't any black quarterbacks, right? There were black quarterbacks in high school, but typically they were in larger school districts, because in the smaller school districts, there were some prejudices that, they could afford to keep those positions for certain people. If you didn't meet that profile, then you weren't going to be considered for that position. We have a role for you as running back, wide receiver, or, any of the other positions that were typecast for that position. So you had the Warren Moons of the world who had to go to other markets, to Canada, and play. He was one that was able to come back later, but he came back after he's older. And,
Sure.
athletics, your strength, your abilities diminish over time. So we never got to see the best or the greatest potential of a Warren Moon until he was older. And he came back, played for, I think, the Houston Oilers at the time. But I said all that to say this, Adam, you look at these 8 teams in the playoffs now, 4 of the teams, 50% of the teams have a guy that's born in this package as their quarterback, their starting quarterback. And one of them is slated to be the MVP, I believe. And you have, on the coaching side, 25% of the teams, 2 of the 8 teams, have a head coach who's black. I mean, now, is it all of a sudden that black people have evolved? No. There was a Tiger Woods before there was this Tiger Woods. They just weren't allowed the ability to play. Just as you point out that if they had not listened to the maintenance person, that hotel would not have done as well, and we wouldn't have the evolution of elevators that are on the outside of some buildings that create architectural marvel some aesthetic appeal for many of these businesses.
Yeah. One thing I think so amazing about your story is just the different spheres you've led in. Originally in business, you were a CEO of a company that navigated some mergers and went public on stock exchanges, and then through mayor, state, and now a run at the federal level. What's different and what's the same between leading in like a business environment and leading in a legislative environment?
I think that the difference, first, if I could say the similarity is you both have constituents. And the more that you are attentive to addressing the needs and sometimes the wants of your constituents, the more relevant you are, the more effective you are, the more successful your organization and the people you represent will. When you keep the people who are your constituents or your customers as the priority, then I think that that is the key to sustainable success. I was listening to the financial news this morning, and it was good to see that inflation. The expectation was that it was not going to, do what it did in being 0.1% down. The expectations from economists was that it was going to be 0.1 increase. So now the market, Wall Street, is anticipating that the banking industry, the financial or the Feds are going to lower interest rates, which should help to curtail inflation and improve pricing, right? Well, it's the same in governance and politics and business. However, the difference is that you're in politics. I have found, and one of the reasons I don't like politics, but I love policy and I love people. And America, our democracy, is worth fighting for. The difference to me is you have these lobbyists and special interest, and on one side, you've got the constituents. So, for instance, we've got 30 million Texans, and then you've got the oil industry, you've got the computer industry, Intel, all those different industries, right? Grocery industry. And at the end of the day, I liken a lot of stuff to relationships or publicly traded companies, or use the analogy of sports. Well, if I were to use the analogy of a publicly traded company, then the common stockholders are the average everyday Joe, whether he votes or doesn't vote, the 30 million Texans. And then you've got your preferred shareholders. Those are the lobbyists, the special interest. And unfortunately, in the world of politics, I've seen too often that the preferred shareholders get the most attention and their issues become legislative priority. And that shouldn't be. It should be one vote, for each person that determines and influences the legislative priorities that we should be focused on. And that's the biggest difference. I mean, you have industries that are sustained not on good products or services that are attentive to the market, but they may be sustained on legislation that keeps them in business. For instance, you look at the mantra of the NRA. The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. For decades, they've been saying that.
Yeah.
It can't be true if we are going in the wrong direction. In fact, now, since 2020, automobile accidents used to be the number one cause of death for children ages 1 to 18. Now it's firearms.
Oof.
And so I would argue that the only thing that can stop a bad guy with a gun is a thoughtful legislator who will listen to whether it's Republicans or Democrats or independents. They're all asking for sensible gun policy like background checks. Or as a former city manager, I'll tell you, Adam, I hated it when we send our officers out and they're outgunned. I mean, many of my officers had to go into homes where there were more weapons and ammunition that we had in our police department.
Oof.
Makes no sense. So we have to be thoughtful at how we address this issue. Finally, on that, I would say that Jesus said in Matthew 26, verse 52, if you live by the sword, you'll die by the sword. Now, Jesus didn't say you couldn't have a sword. I have a gun.
Yeah.
You can have a gun, but you can't put your faith in guns. And that's what we've been sold. The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And now we have more guns in this nation than we do have people. That's putting not our trust in God, but it's putting our trust in guns. And we can have guns. Again, Jesus didn't say you couldn't have a gun. He said if you live by the sword, if you believe the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, you're sadly mistaken. It hadn't worked, and it won't work. And we'll continue to bury our children until we are willing to have thoughtful, courageous legislators who are willing to put sensible things in place like mental health. Why would it be a problem to have requirements that someone be sane before we give them a gun? We do it. They have to have a license to drive a car. So, we just have to change. And that's the biggest issue or difference to me.
Yeah, the constituents versus the preferred shareholders. And you're saying, yeah, when you're talking about the focus on constituents, I was reminded by one of my first managers had this saying, we want to treat our clients like people and our people like clients.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, thought it was really nice, really simple. You could always remember it. One of the things you've demonstrated just throughout your career and even in this conversation is like leadership, the concept of leadership as a calling. How have your leadership motives changed over time?
How have they changed over time? I have listened more. I remember I would do a lot of homework, and I still do. I want to know the issues and understand them. And I remember when I was mayor, younger and much younger. And I remember the town hall. We had the town hall meeting and talking about a new vision because I'm, young mayor, first African-American mayor elected while the city was still majority white. And town hall, it was packed. It was talking about a new vision and everything. And every question they had, I was able to answer because, Adam, I did my homework.
Yeah.
And there was an older gentleman who came up to me afterwards. I still remember him today. His name is Tom Kaburk. Tom Kaburk came to me and said, after everybody had left, and he said, Mayor, you answered everybody's question, and you were very thorough. But young man, I would suggest to you that you don't be so eager to answer their questions, because many of those people still left with the same position that they had. You should don't feel like you've got to answer all the questions. Give it some time and listen. listen to them. Even if you got the answer, just listen to them because you might learn something. And that for me was one of those um, pivotal moments for me to adjust in my leadership. Another one came in executive session, and I was laying out a plan to my council, and all of them were older than me. And I tend back then to talk very fast. And I just laid out this comprehensive plan, had PowerPoint, everything. And and then after I finished, it was as though I said nothing. And one of our council members, his name is Sandy Respis, he has this deep voice, and he says, he gives his idea as though I said nothing. And he took one of the initiatives that I had in my idea and said it very slow. And everybody said, I love that. And I was sitting there thinking, wait a minute, I just said that and more. And I realized that, the cadence of your delivery and how many points you want to make matter if you really want people on board. Otherwise, you just be a dictator and, just try and do it yourself, but you won't get far. So, yeah, that's how my leadership has changed, summed up in being a better listener.
Those are great stories. Yeah, I think a lot about there's a concept called multiplier leadership, and it's this concept that the best leaders aren't the smartest, but they make the people around them the smartest, like with empowerment and questions, and that seems to be what you're learning. A lot of people, and I'm learning it too, very much, like day to day. It's very humbling. A lot of people don't know this, but you wear and have worn a ton of hats. In addition to being a state rep and a Senate candidate, you're also the head of a large family and a pastor at a church. Is there a habit that you have that you feel like sustains you?
Prayer, meditation,
Mm-hmm.
being, as scripture says, quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. That has been really what that habit has driven me. Even when I am excited, I try very hard to not necessarily be the first one to speak. Often, I'm the last one to speak if I speak, because sometimes, first of all, if we really believe, as Ephesians 6:12 says, that our fight is not with flesh and blood, but there's a spiritual war that's going on. So the tentacles of my conscious effort is to be committed to realizing that there is more happening around us than what I can visually see. So there is a certain confidence that I think that exudes from us when the embodiment of our communication is beyond the people around you. And I know that that is a spiritual aspect of our humanity, but it's one that I think we do not uh, lean on as much as we should, because we can be anxious to fix some inequities, which we should be, some disparities, which we should be, to protect rights of all individuals, that they might have, uh, autonomy of mind, body, and soul. Uh, Yet, uh, when when we're not fully engaged in that power, to me, we're fighting alone. And so, prayer, meditation, and being disciplined about that. And I noticed about 5 years ago in my meditation and study of God's word that I noticed Jesus, when he would interact with people, often the scripture says that he beheld someone. Uh, in other words, he took the whole person in.
Mm.
And that's something that I have found in all these roles, that it's important, because sometimes there is a urgency to have somebody behold you. But God is reciprocal in everything. So if I am beholding someone, God Almighty, I believe that He uh, beholds me, and that shows up in favor. When you have favor and grace, uh, and it's easier said than practiced, but it can become more natural over.
Yeah, suppose that's why they call it practice. And I've certainly experienced that myself. I think there's a big connection between I call it emotional spiritual growth and leadership. Is like I think to be at our best, we have to be operating with a foundational level of trust. I think we need to have an orientation towards seeing the potential in people, and also have the emotional capacity, because I think what's happening in organizations is way bigger than work. It's kind of like the classroom that people are playing out, wherever they are emotionally, spiritually, right in front of us.
Yeah.
So it's a tremendous honor to lead.
It is. It is. And, to much is given, as Luke 12:48 says, much is required. So, when you are given the opportunity to lead, I don't think it's by accident that it says to much is given first. So the sequential order of, this transaction is you're given something first, then something's required. Thank God it isn't required of you. Nothing's required of you that you haven't been given, and you have to do everything to understand who you are, and that can be difficult when people and their identity crisis are trying to get validation from other people, other influencers, as to who they are. Uh, it is so important.
Well, Representative Sherman, you've been really generous with your time. Before I let you go, what's the best way for people to keep up with you and your campaign?
Thank you. As we go across this state, carlsherman.com is my website. And my wife says, you don't tell people your name when you're out there speaking. And so carlsherman.com is our website. You can go on and keep track of the campaign. And I would appreciate your support if you're looking to change direction for politics as usual. I'm excited about the support that we're garnering from every individual that we seem to be coming across, that they're sick and tired of politics as usual, and they want to see change in this nation.
Well, we'll have links to carlsherman.com in the show notes, but thank you for everything you're doing to lead, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Adam. I appreciate you.
Thank you for listening to Tuesdays with Morrissey. That conversation was with Texas House of Representative and U.S. Senate candidate Representative Carl Sherman. What I loved about the episode was just his emphasis on leading with humanity at the center, and what we can learn about leadership in different aspects and different arenas. If you enjoyed the show, definitely like, comment, and share this episode wherever you listen to podcasts. See you soon.